Please note this podcast discusses real-life crimes and may include sensitive topics such as violence, abuse, and other disturbing content. We recommend listener discretion.
Her body was hidden in the loft. I've seen the photographs of how her body was hidden, slightly bound in black bin liners, pushed between the rafters in a loft that wasn't lit, and bags of rubbish piled on top of it.
I'm journalist Helen Fospero.
I'm crime reporter Martin Brunt.
And this is True Criminals.
A journey into the darkest corners of the criminal underworld with insights from decades of true crime reporting.
The stories behind the stories, plus exclusive interviews with those closely involved in notorious cases.
Re-examining crimes so shocking, they still haunt our imaginations.
In the summer of 2012, a search for a missing child became a heartbreaking and disturbing murder investigation. A week-long hunt for Tia Sharp in the new Addington area of South London rallied neighbours, family and the media. It took a shocking turn when police discovered Tia's body hidden in the very house she was last seen, her grandmother's home. The prime suspect turned out to be someone inside the family circle, Tia's own step-grandfather, Stuart Hazell. This revelation sent waves of anger and disbelief through the community. How could a trusted family member commit such a horrific act? And how did the truth go unnoticed for so long? Big questions were asked about police procedure after officers missed finding Tia's body during several searches of the house and didn't spot the lies of the killer, who initially seemed to help with the search. Over 2 episodes, we'll explore the investigation's twists and turns with expert insight from former Metropolitan Police Detective Chief Inspector Nick Scola, the senior investigating officer on Tia's case. Martin, you covered this story for Sky News. How do you look back on it?
Like all child murders I've covered, I've got some very lasting memories of the Tia Sharp case. At the time, this was early August 2012, London, you'll remember, was buzzing with the Olympic Games. Yet suddenly, many eyes were diverted onto this quiet housing estate in New Addington, South London. I remember arriving there on the street where Tia was last seen. It was a modest cul-de-sac of terraced houses, and I saw dozens of volunteers and officers handing out flyers with Tia's smiling face. It was a warm summer day, and the atmosphere was heavy with worry. Tia's family were desperately appealing for her safe return, and the whole community, it seemed, had turned out to help. I saw people searching nearby woods in the rain, taping missing posters to lampposts and shop windows. Many of them had personal phone numbers on them for people to call. The police later persuaded people just to put the police numbers on. Almost the first person I met when I tipped up was Tia's gran, Christine Bicknell. She was a passionate, formidable figure who later became a dominant figure in the story, and I did my first live interview with her.
What do you remember from that interview, Martin?
Well, her passion, her concern, she was very articulate. It was a very good interview, and she was very careful to get across the family's concern, their gratitude to the police, and above all, their hope, and this was 3 days after she'd vanished, their hope that she would still be found alive.
You said there was a lot of worry from the local community, but 3 days after, there was still a presumption, I think, nationwide that here was a little girl who'd perhaps strolled somewhere and was going to be found alive.
People always cling to the hope and expectation in many cases that a missing child will be found alive, because if there's no evidence of any harm that's come to her, then why wouldn't you? Her stepfather, David Niles, had posted a heartfelt message on Facebook in which he said, "It's Daddy, please come home, I love you and miss you, XXX. And that really illustrated the family's anguish. I covered the initial police press conferences alongside other reporters. The police said that they were treating it as a high-risk missing child case, not a crime. She'd gone missing on Friday. I was at a press conference on the following Monday at Scotland Yard. That was a rare evening press conference. I think that gave us a sense of the urgency. Police wanted to get out the appeals for help. There weren't many journalists at that press conference, but I guess most of them were still at the scene in South London. I can remember the police stressing that they had no suspects at that point, and the priority was to find Tia safe and well. There was even an appeal from Tia's uncle, David Sharp, that was broadcast on TV. He stood outside the house and pleaded, "Come home, walk through that door, and it's like back to being a normal family. I want her to be somewhere safe, just waiting to come home." It was clear from all our interactions with the family that she was deeply loved and that everybody was clinging to that hope.
As you were reporting those hopeful appeals, the truth was far darker than anybody could have possibly imagined.
It was, and I'm sure even in those early stages, police were already fearing the possibility of the worst. I remember interviewing neighbours a few days into the search, and people were frustrated, some of them asking how a 12-year-old girl could simply vanish. Some residents confided suspicions to me, whispering that something felt off about the situation. Still, nothing could prepare us for the truth that eventually emerged, that Tia had been in her grandmother's house all along, and that the very man helping lead vigils for her, Stuart Hazell, was in fact her killer. As a journalist, I had to report these developments objectively. But I remember the sense of shock. Even now, years on, I can picture that street and recall the impact of those revelations, the anguish of a community that clearly felt betrayed.
Tell us a bit about Tia Sharp and what she was like, Martin.
Tia was a 12-year-old schoolgirl from South London. On Thursday, the 2nd of August 2012, she went to stay overnight at her grandma's house in New Addington. Her grandmother, Christine Bicknell, lived there with her boyfriend, Stuart Hazell, who was 37. Hazell wasn't Tia's biological relative, but he had been the grandmother's partner for about 5 years and was essentially, I suppose, a step-grandfather figure to Tia. By all accounts, Tia trusted him. In fact, other members of the family said she idolised Stuart Hazell. The next day, Friday the 3rd of August, Hazell later claimed that Tia had left the house around midday to go to Croydon's Whitgift Centre, a local shopping centre, to buy a new pair of shoes. So Hazell was already establishing that he was the last person to see her alive. And according to his story, Tia was supposed to be back by 6 o'clock that night, but she didn't come home. And by later that night, her family realised something was wrong and reported her missing. And they said it was completely out of character for her. She'd never run away or gone missing before.
Give us a sense of how police responded to this.
Well, by Saturday, a full missing person search was underway. The Met assigned dozens of officers, essentially more than 80, to look for Tia. So although it was a missing person investigation, it was to all intents and purposes, I wouldn't say a murder investigation, but it was given the resources of a murder investigation. So 80 officers is a lot of people. They set up a base in the neighbourhood and started scouring the area on foot and with helicopters. I remember seeing police sniffer dogs in the nearby woods and open spaces within an initial perimeter of about 400 yards of the house. They also did an initial check of Tia's grandmother's home. In fact, the Met later confirmed that officers searched the house not once but 3 separate times in that first week. They looked in Tia's bedroom on that first night when she'd been reported missing. That's standard practice in such cases because a missing child's bedroom and the paraphernalia in there can quite often throw up clues that might explain why she's vanished. But then a specialist team did a more thorough search of the whole house in the early hours of Sunday, the 5th of August. A third sweep was done 3 days later on the Wednesday, the 8th of August, using specially trained sniffer dogs. Despite all of that, they found no sign of Tia, no body, no obvious evidence of any foul play.
Well, meanwhile, police and volunteers were canvassing the estate. They handed out thousands of leaflets with Tia's picture on them, stopped drivers to ask for any dash cam footage, and collected CCTV recordings from buses and shops all over the area.
There was a mountain of material. Detectives ended up reviewing more than 800 hours of CCTV video, trying to spot any trace of Tia after she supposedly left home. Not a single camera showed her at any tram stop or any bus or around the mall that afternoon. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. And this lack of CCTV evidence was a huge red flag because it suggested that Tia might never have left the house at all. Still, early on, police kept all possibilities open. They considered scenarios from abduction to a runaway situation. In fact, they even consulted detectives from the Shannon Matthews case, a 2008 incident 4 years earlier, where a child's disappearance in Yorkshire turned out to be a faked kidnap by her own mother. As I reported at the time, this wasn't because they assumed a hoax, but they wanted insight from any previous cases of missing young girls to ensure that nothing was overlooked. So far, the real story of Tia's disappearance hasn't emerged. That's what I remember saying on Sky News, because truly nobody knew what had happened.
And all this time, Martin, Tia's family continued to plead and appeal for information, didn't they?
Yes, a lot of family involvement. Both her parents were involved, though they were separated. Tia's mum, Natalie, Christine Bicknell's daughter. She lived in Morden, another part of South London, and Tia's biological father, Stephen Carter, came down from Northampton, where he lived, to join the search. The community support was enormous. The Sun newspaper posted a £25,000 reward for information leading to Tia's return. That gives you an idea of how this was a story that gripped the country. Emotions were running high. Her mum, Natalie, was, as you might imagine, said to be in bits.
Tell us about her step-grandfather, Stuart Hazell, who was the last person to see Tia alive.
Stuart Hazell was a window cleaner. He was Christine Bicknell's, Tia's grandmother's, partner for 5 years. Before that, a bit odd this, he'd had a brief relationship with Tia's mum, Natalie. He was being treated as a key witness, not a suspect at that stage. Police had interviewed him on the Wednesday, the 8th of August, for more than 2 hours, and as far as we know, he cooperated fully. After questioning, the police, let him go. He hadn't been taken into custody, he wasn't under arrest, but that was the end of their interest in him, on that day at least. But then Stuart Hazell made a very public show of helping to find Tia, because the next day he spoke to ITV News on camera, protesting his innocence. And it's quite eerie to watch it now because he looked distressed. He's wearing a T-shirt emblazoned with Tia's photo and the words "Find Tia" as he talked to the reporter. He insisted he'd done nothing to Tia and that she was like his own daughter. She's got no problems at all. She's a happy-go-lucky golden angel. She's perfect. Those are the words that Hazell used. And he added that he just wanted Tia home safely. When he was asked about suspicions against him, he acknowledged feeling targeted. And he said, "I do feel people are pointing the finger at me, but it's not about me, it's about Tia. And we've got to get her home, man. I just don't know what more to do." This interview was broadcast widely. Hazell effectively playing the role of the worried grandfather figure. He even led a candlelit vigil in the neighbourhood that week, appearing emotional as he prayed for Tia's return. And I remember he also sent a text message, we discovered later, to another window cleaner mate, telling him the media were suspicious about him. And he said, "They're making me look like Jack the Ripper. I don't know where she is."
A week after Tia disappeared, the police concentrated their efforts back at her grandmother's house, and a few hours into this intensive search, police made a horrific discovery in the attic.
I remember getting a call telling me that if I wasn't there already, I should get back to the house for a dramatic development. So mid-afternoon, we were told they'd found a body. And although they didn't immediately confirm the identity, Everyone naturally feared the worst. As I reported on Sky News, it must be Tia's body. It couldn't have been the body of anybody else. Sadly, that was correct. The remains of a young girl were recovered from the loft, concealed in a black bedsheet and rubbish bags. The body had been there for about a week, all through those earlier searches, and somehow had been missed until that day. It later came out that the loft had been apparently checked on the first weekend, but clearly not thoroughly enough. Eventually, the Met Police had to formally apologise for this oversight, attributing it to human error. An internal review was launched to ensure that such a terrible mistake wouldn't be repeated.
And of course, then that was the moment that everybody had dreaded, where what had seemed for a while like a missing persons case, it was now a full-blown murder investigation. And one can't imagine how devastating that must have been for Tia's family.
Yes, some officer had to break that news to Tia's mum, Natalie, that same afternoon. Me and my fellow journalists on the scene watched as stunned family members and neighbours gathered. Some of them collapsed in grief. Others were full of anger, and that anger is often directed at the media. And I think to a degree it was in this case. Suddenly we've gone from people who can help broadcast appeals to be intruders who are seen to be revelling in misfortune. It's not the first time that has happened, particularly on child murder cases in particularly tight communities. The whole neighbourhood must have felt betrayed. I remember one local resident told Sky News, "We've spent 2 nights in the rain searching woodland, and all the while her body was there in that house." Another told me she felt sick to her stomach. She'd suspected something like this, but was still shocked by the reality. There was also a palpable anger towards the authorities and the family. I recall a man shouting at police, "Weren't you watching him?" referring to Hazell. It was chaos outside the house as the forensic team put up a tent and covered the front with tarpaulins so they could work in privacy. Inside the house, investigators spent hours and hours collecting evidence. They'd later reveal that Tia's body appeared to have been carefully wrapped, a deliberate and perhaps obvious effort by the killer to hide her.
And with Tia's body found, I would imagine attention turned very swiftly to Stuart Hazell, who was nowhere to be found at that moment.
Earlier that day, when Christine Bicknell, Tia's grandmother, had been asked about Hazell's whereabouts, she said, a bit oddly, "I don't know where Stuart is. He's out doing his own thing." And then she added that he's had it hard. He knows the finger is being pointed at him. It appears Hazell got wind that the net was closing in. He fled the house and went on the run sometime that Friday. He turned off his mobile phone to avoid being tracked. As soon as the body was found, the Met launched a full-scale manhunt for Stuart Hazell. They named him. They warned the public not to approach him. Hazell had a history of violence and was potentially dangerous, they said. They broadcast his photo and description, urging anyone who saw him to dial 999. He was by then a pretty distinctive figure to everybody. Tall, thin, red-haired, shaved head, and he'd been all over the media and the news bulletins for a week. So many people, I think, who'd followed the story had a pretty fixed idea of what he looked like.
And he didn't get far, did he?
No, and I don't think anybody expected him to. He didn't sound like somebody who had the wherewithal to disappear for long. That very night, that Friday night, a week on, a member of the public spotted him at Cannon Hill Common. This was a park area in Morden, which is close to where Tia lived with her mum, a few miles from New Addington. It was 8:25 p.m. Police moved in and arrested him on suspicion of murder. He was reportedly found semi-conscious in some bushes with bottles of alcohol. There was some CCTV that we eventually saw that showed him buying vodka in an off-licence nearby. There were rumours that he might have been attempting to overdose, but he was taken into custody without any great drama.
And over the next 48 hours, 2 more arrests were made.
Yes, in the early hours of the next day, that's Saturday the 11th of August, Tia's gran, Christine Bicknell, was arrested on suspicion of murder. And their neighbour, Paul Meehan, was arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender. I suppose this was the police casting a wide net to see if anybody else had been involved or was part of a cover-up. Christine, 46 years old and utterly distraught, maintained that she knew nothing of Tia's death, and she was questioned, and then she was released on bail and eventually cleared of any wrongdoing. The neighbour, Paul Meehan, was also bailed pending further inquiries, but that was a different outcome for him. He was eventually charged and punished, not for harming Tia, but for the lie he told that impeded the investigation. He had told detectives early on that he had seen Tia leaving the house on that Friday morning.
And we'll ask Nick about exactly how that did impede the investigation very shortly. Hazell, of course, was the prime suspect. And on the Sunday, 2 days after his arrest, he was formally charged with the murder of Tia Sharp.
Yes, he made a brief appearance via video link from prison to a magistrate's court. We didn't hear much from him. He simply confirmed his name and date of birth. The case was immediately sent to the Old Bailey for trial. We were now learning more about this man. Hazell had a troubled past. He was a convicted criminal with a string of previous offences, including drug dealing, burglary, assaults, even a charge for carrying a machete in public, but nothing about offences against children. Newspapers had begun to dig into his background even before the body was found, which, as I noted on air, was fueling tensions on the estate. People were asking, how was somebody with that history around children, never mind being left in charge of one? But it's important to say that Hazell's past crimes, as serious as they were, didn't include anything like child abuse, and he wasn't on the sex offenders register.
And how did Tia actually die? What did the forensics reveal?
Because of the decomposition, it was eventually impossible to tell exactly how she died. A post-mortem examination began straight away, but it had to be paused because the pathologist needed more time to determine that cause of death. There was bad decomposition because her body had spent a week in a small, stifling attic in August temperatures, and that inevitably complicated things from a scientific point of view. In the end, the cause of death was officially recorded as undetermined, though investigators strongly suspected that she'd been smothered. What they did establish was that this was a crime with a clear sexual element to it. Evidence later presented in court showed that Tia had been sexually assaulted even after her death. Hazell had taken obscene photographs of her, sickening details which we'll discuss in the next episode about Hazell's trial.
But right now, Nick Scola joins us. In 2012, Nick was a detective chief inspector with the Metropolitan Police and the senior investigating officer on this case, with an inside track on what was going on behind the scenes as police worked to find Tia and then catch her killer. Nick, welcome to True Criminals.
That's okay.
Nick, the initial phase of the operation was a missing persons search, but presumably it was effectively being treated from the first moment as a potential crime. Can you talk us through those early days of your investigation?
Obviously, whenever a child goes missing, there's a number of options. You don't close your mind to any of them. Initially, Tia was a missing girl who we wanted to get back. She was reported missing on the Friday, and I wasn't called in until the Sunday morning. I was called in Saturday, arrived Sunday to take over the investigation. The fact that myself and my team were called in meant there were significant concerns for her well-being. Whenever a child goes missing, clearly it's a matter of grave concern for the police. Unfortunately, children go missing quite regularly, and the majority do come home safely. So you have to just get the balance right in determining what missing child needs a full investigation with a large team. Could that missing child be found with fewer resources?
And what did you do, Nick, in those early days, once you arrived to take over the investigation? What was going on from that Sunday onwards?
Initially, because the incident's been going for a couple of days, you're trying to catch up. You're trying to find out exactly what has been done so far, what steps have been taken, and what information's available. When someone goes missing, the investigation is based around their home address. although Tia went missing from a neighbouring borough in Croydon. So she lived in Merton, went missing in Croydon. So you had two police divisions, both involved in the investigation. So there was some crossover, and you had to actually establish what had been done and who'd done it, because there'd been no clear lead on the investigation up until the time I arrived.
But you'd done door-to-door inquiries, checking known sex offenders, combing CCTV, searches on the ground. All of that was done before you got there.
Some of it had been done. The deployment of search teams had been done. That happened overnight before I took over on the Sunday morning, which was a problem in itself because it happened overnight. It was whilst the crime was being handed over from the local boroughs to the Specialist Crime Department. There was no one actually there to brief that search team when they were deployed at 4 o'clock in the morning. There'd been some other local searches, which is standard when someone's reported missing, who takes the report, just goes round to have a quick look around the house, just make sure there's no evidence the child is hiding in the house or there's no clear sign of any crime or anything of interest. So the searches had been done and there had been limited house to house, but without a clear idea of what the investigating team was trying to do, without a lead. It was a little bit ad hoc at that stage. It's when a team comes in who are used to dealing with a major investigation that you can really get that going and get all the immediate house-to-house done. And where Tia went missing from in New Addington is an unusual geographic location. You know, it's a large estate. There's only 2 roads in and 2 roads out. So it's easy to cover from CCTV. There are trams and buses going in and out. So if you collected all the CCTV from those vehicles, theoretically you would capture her leaving.
How much focus, Nick, was put on the need to confirm or rule out that Tia had left her grandmother's street that Friday?
When I first arrived, I was told that she had spent the night at her grandparents' house. And I suppose through your own perceptions, the word grandparents tends to put in your mind a place of safety, people who are caring. And the story that she'd been with her grandparents was in the briefing note I got. It wasn't until the Sunday when my officers went out and started interviewing the family, they came back and said, actually, Stuart Hazell wasn't Tia's grandfather at all. He was the grandmother's boyfriend and he'd spent the night alone with her. These facts hadn't come to my notice up until that time. It had just been she had spent the night at her grandmother's. And this is some of the information that falls down the cracks, perhaps when there's more than one unit investigating.
And you also, by that stage, had presumably dug up Stuart Hazell's previous convictions that perhaps gave you some cause for concern.
Yes, the fact he had previous convictions is always a worry, but it's not evidence. And to be honest, by that stage, we had had 67 sightings of Tia, just in the local boroughs, 22 sightings of Tia around the Metropolitan Police area, sightings of her nationwide, someone in Scotland who admitted kidnapping her and was later charged with wasting police time. And most importantly, we had her next door neighbour who supported Stuart Hazell's account that she had left to go to Croydon. And he said he saw her go. He knew her. So the very fact that he said he saw her go to Croydon, as Stuart Hazell said, really puts you on the back foot. We now know she was already dead by then, but we had a witness who knows her well saying, yes, she left the house alive and well and headed to Croydon. So that confuses it, because in one way, you're concerned about Stuart Hazell and his relationship and the fact she's not the grandmother and she spent the night alone with her, but you'd need to go where the evidence points you. And the evidence pointed us towards her leaving the home in a fit and healthy condition.
But Nick, one aspect that did draw some criticism later was the fact that police officers had visited the grandmother's house on a number of occasions and didn't find Tia's body until a week later. How does a search of a house like that happen a few times and something as significant as a body is missed?
A few times is an exaggeration. The first search was just the officer who took a report going round and literally having a very brief visual look. The second search was, again, a local officer who just wanted to make sure the first search had been done okay. And again, on his own, he had a look around the house. It was the third search that, without a doubt, should have found her body. Someone chose to do that search at 4 o'clock in the morning. In retrospect, I'm not sure that's a good idea. None of us were at our best at 4 o'clock in the morning. Because of the Olympics, there was a lot of ad hoc search teams around. And so the team that went in had been put together and didn't know each other's strengths and weaknesses. They went in at a time of the day when everyone's body is flatlining. In my opinion, that search should have been done late in the morning after my team had come in. One of my officers could have been with them and told them what they wanted, but it wasn't. So we can't change that. Her body was hidden in the loft. I've seen the photographs of how her body was hidden, slightly bound in black bin liners, pushed between the rafters in a loft that wasn't lit, and bags of rubbish piled on top of it. It was a small loft. It was difficult. Normally a pair would go in and watch what each other are doing and search as a team. One person had to go in. Inexperienced officer, he must have gone in with a slightly negative attitude. There's going to be no one in here. He should have found the body. It wasn't an obvious body. It wasn't clearly visible, but he should have found it. He didn't find it, and that it sets the investigation back a little bit. It made no difference to the outcome. Obviously, Tia was dead by then, so it didn't cost her her life. It cost us a few days in the investigation. We had the neighbours saying that Tia had left alive and well. Other people on the estate who knew Tia said they'd seen her, so it gave us something else to concentrate. We had to look away from the family, not toward the family. When we got all the CCTV in, we had a thorough look at it, and when we couldn't find any evidence of Tia leaving the estate, it enabled us to focus on the estate, visit registered sex offenders on the estate, do the house-to-house, search the bins and the environment around the estate. And as we come up with more and more negative searches, it allowed us to look back at the family. So there'd been nothing worse than making assumptions that Stuart Hazell was a guilty man just because he had some previous convictions and spent the night with her, when we knew Tia had been seen leaving the flat, according to the neighbours. So as an investigator, had we spent too much time going back to the family and her body had been found elsewhere, it'd have been a very easy accusation to make that it was just a lazy investigation and we weren't following all lines of inquiry. We were just focusing on one person. So we looked at everything. We looked at CCTV in Croydon Town Centre where she's supposed to be. We looked at all the routes in and out. We did searches of all the open ground in the area, the dustbins. We visited sex offenders. We did house to house around the estate. And ultimately, we found no evidence of Tia ever leaving that house. Options we had to think about were, had she left when the neighbours saw her go and then gone back to her grandfather's house and something had befallen her then? So that was the reason we went back in again, that time with a police dog trained to search for bodily remains or blood or something like that, to have a look round. The dog went round and didn't find Tia, but we couldn't put the dog in the loft. The loft wasn't boarded, and you can't put a dog in an unboarded loft. It obviously clearly doesn't know how to sit on the rafters. But it gave a mild indication. The handler wasn't convinced, but talked it over, and the following day said the dog did seem to be looking, possibly up towards a wall where some bodily fluids could have been cleared off, possibly towards the loft. So that's when I had the grounds then to go back and tell the family I was going to go in with a full forensic team to look around.
Nick, I got a sense from a press officer at the time about the embarrassment and the perception of finding the body where it had been for a week so late in the day. But I'd love to know what you said to the search team.
Well, the team that found her weren't the team that did the initial search. So although I didn't deploy the search team and didn't carry out the search, you still feel embarrassed about the fact that it's got wrong. But I was also very happy with the investigative strategy. I didn't just focus on Stuart Hazell. That's how investigations go wrong. You make your mind up early, someone's guilty, and you just try and make the evidence fit them, which I was never going to do. I was going to follow the evidence. Evidence took Tia away from the house. We went through every line of inquiry, found no evidence of her actually leaving. So then again, the evidence pointed back at the house. There's no evidence she left. And then we could do more searches. So yes, I'd love the first team to have found her before I was even involved. I may not even have got involved then. It would have been a very quick and easy investigation. But it happened. You can't dwell on problems. I think in truth, in most major investigations, they're very human-based, a lot of individuals making decisions. And in truth, in many of them, you look back, you think, well, that could have been done a bit better. That didn't go quite right. But that's how the system works. You constantly reevaluate what you've been doing And that way, if a mistake has been made, it comes to notice. So you could almost call it a success. Stuart Hazell never had the chance to move the body again. We were able to recover it, and in recovering it, we recovered evidence, and ultimately he pleaded guilty to the murder. So a successful investigation with perhaps an embarrassing hiccup along the way.
Early on, Stuart Hazell was seemingly trying to help with the investigation as the last known person to see Tia. At what point, Nick, did he really become a suspect in your mind?
It's difficult. His account from day one was unusual. Tia was going to Croydon to meet a friend, but she had left her mobile phone behind. How was she going to arrange to meet her friends? Us older people who never had mobile phones, we knew. Meet you by the Forum pub in the Whitgift Centre or something along those lines. We'd have locations to meet and we'd find a way of managing it. I'm not sure a current teenager has got that within their skill set. So the fact the phone was left behind immediately made you feel unhappy. You got to get past the fact that the next door neighbour saw Tia allegedly leaving fit and well. So when did he become a suspect? Realistically, when he decided to go missing when the body was found. That is essentially when you could say he is a definite suspect. Now, as a person of interest before, as anyone had access to the house was of interest. Was the next door neighbour hiding something? Had she gone back and met the next door neighbour? There are so many still potential ways she could have come to harm. But when we announced we were to go back and do the forensic search, which takes a little while to arrange, and we had to get everyone out of the house. And for instance, they had pets. You had to get the pets out of the house because carcinogenic chemicals will be used. Their pets weren't vaccinated, so that you can't put them into a dog and cat's home, and they won't take them in an unvaccinated condition. So there are some arrangements you have to undertake. So we went back, the body had gone smell by then. She was obviously there and he had gone missing. So that's when you first start to really and truly know who the suspect is.
Nick, what about the role of Paul Meehan, the neighbour who gave you the information about a false sighting of Tia? What impact did that have on the investigation?
Meehan's information had an enormous effect on the investigation. You've got someone who knows Tia, knows her well, speaks to her a lot, and says he saw her leave the house alive and happy after we now know she was dead. You check out Meehan himself as part of our normal investigation. We look to see if there's any reason he would lie to us or would he have any guilty involvement. There was nothing obvious in his background to suggest that he could be involved or had any reason to tell us that. And to this day, still not sure why he did it. Maybe he just got swept along with the media presence outside, wanting to support his friend who lived next door. Really don't know why he did it, but it steers you in an entirely different direction and pushed us away from the suspect and the location of the body.
And he did get charged in the end with wasting police time, didn't he?
He did, yes.
Just wondering, Nick, when you described Tia's body in the loft and wrapped in the plastic, I could weep when I hear stuff like that. You're a professional police officer and I'm sure you've dealt with some horrific crimes in your time. But I just wondered, on a slightly more personal note for you, a week after Tia went missing, you found her body, Stuart Hazell fled. What is that like for you? Not just as an investigating officer, but it feels quite heartbreaking to me.
That's a difficult question. In truth, you become so wrapped up in the investigation, your emotions don't get involved in it. It's another step in the problem. By the time her body was found, you're fairly convinced she is dead in your own mind. She's been missing quite a while. So it was just another step. However the body was found, it would be heartbreaking whether it's wrapped in black plastic or in abandoned woodland or along those lines. So it's just another step. We've now got a dead body. We've now got to find the evidence to establish exactly who killed her and what opportunities are from a dead body. The dead body itself becomes a crime scene, and you're more focused on gathering the evidence that that dead body can give you and becoming too emotionally involved in the circumstances around it.
You made the decision to name Stuart Hazell. You wanted to find him. You issued an emergency alert. Can you give us a sense of the relief you felt when he was arrested?
In truth, I knew he never had the resources to go missing for a long time. So it would only ever be a matter of time until we found him, until he was arrested. I'm glad it was done relatively quickly so we could move the investigation forward and not spend any resources on it. So it's not a matter of great relief. I knew we'd find him. He was arrested that same day and the investigation moved on.
Thanks so much, Nick. We really appreciate your candid insight. Please stay with us. We're going to talk more in our next episode about how the case concluded and its broader implications. But it's been really interesting to hear the story from your side. Martin, it was really fascinating hearing Nick speak about the challenges of the investigation. As a journalist covering this in real time, did you sense the possibility that Hazell might be involved before it became obvious?
I think I did. It would be easy to say that I'd fingered him already as the culprit. I'm not sure that's entirely true, but he was a rather strange character. And it's easy to see now that all those red flags were pointing to him. But during that week, it was quite a confusing picture. I did notice around day 5 or 6 that the police presence around the grandmother's house remained intense. And as Nick has told us, the investigation went away from the house because somebody said they saw Tia leave, and then it came back to the house. And that was very obvious to see in terms of the police presence there. And that obviously signalled that they weren't convinced that Tia had ever left her grandma's house. When Hazell gave that TV interview in which he called Tia an angel, denied any involvement and talked about how much he loved her, I remember feeling a bit uneasy because I've seen potential suspects talking in those terms before. I also felt a bit jealous, of course, that ITV had scooped me on that interview with Hazell. I've also interviewed genuinely innocent family members who also seemed a bit off due to the stress. So I didn't jump to any conclusions. And I think as responsible journalists, we have to be very careful not to wrongly accuse people or even give the impression that they are suspects. In fact, until the body was found, most press coverage treated Hazell and the grandmother sympathetically, as people frantically trying to find what had happened to their missing loved one.
After the truth came out, I do remember that there was a lot of public anger, and some of it perhaps unfairly directed at Christine, the grandmother. People asked how could she not know? There were accusations online, but ultimately there wasn't any evidence to suggest that she had a clue, was there?
No, she really did go through a tough time. She trusted her partner wrongly, as it turned out. But it's a pattern we've seen in other cases too. Rather sadly, I can think of other investigations like the Scola murders in 2002, which we covered in episode 4 of True Criminals. And many, many years ago, I was a pupil at the school where all that happened. The culprit, Ian Huntley, was the school caretaker who pretended to help in the search for the 2 girls, even speaking to the press. I remember him setting out the chairs in my old school hall for the police press conferences. In fact, he had killed the girls. Now, Hazell's behaviour was very much in that vein. And like Huntley in Soham, he was the last person to see the victim alive. So you had the killer hiding in plain sight, inserting himself into the public narrative, here as a distraught relative. It's a chilling tactic, but not uncommon for some offenders.
Broadly speaking, this case raises the issue of child protection within families. We teach our children, don't we, about stranger danger. But here, the danger was inside the grandmother's home.
Very much so. One of the hardest facts, I think, to come to terms with is that Tia was killed by somebody she felt safe with. If she had ever felt threatened by Stuart Hazell, there's no evidence that she told anybody about it. Hazell had been part of her family's life for years. In fact, he'd dated her mother before he dated her grandmother for a very brief period. There were reports that Tia even called Stuart Hazell her granddad. I suppose technically he was her step-granddad. Statistically, a lot of crimes against children are by people they know. It's not usually the proverbial stranger in a white van. More often, it's a relative, a family friend, a carer, a school caretaker like Ian Huntley. That's the frightening reality. How do we guard against that? Well, it's not easy. Perhaps one lesson is that previous criminal behaviour should be a warning sign. Hazell had a violent, troubled past, not specifically towards children, but generally. And as Nick Scola said, you can't hold that against somebody and focus on them as a potential suspect because you then get diverted and sometimes in the wrong direction. It might be, in hindsight, a person like that shouldn't have been allowed such unsupervised access to a child, but he didn't have previous convictions for child molestation or any kind of sex attacks on kids. Christine Bicknell, Tia's gran, thought she could help Hazell straighten out his life. She may not have realised the extent of his demons.
In the next episode, we'll delve into the courtroom drama and the evidence that brought the case to a head. We'll also be joined again by Nick Scola, the senior investigating officer in Tia's murder, to find out how detectives built their case and discuss its aftermath and legacy. Hey listeners, your support means everything to us. If you're enjoying the podcast, please take a moment to leave us a review. It helps us grow, reach new listeners, and keep bringing you the stories you love. This episode is brought to you by Audio Bleach Global. Our producer is Russell Barnes, with audio production by Andrew Chappell. The original score was composed by Chap Mannequin, artwork by Bleached, executive produced by Lee Mann. Follow True Criminals on Instagram at true.criminals and on YouTube at youtube.com/@true-criminals. For exclusive content and ways to support the show, visit us at patreon.com/True Criminals. For partnership opportunities, please contact us at contact@audiobleachglobal.com.